conventional deadlifts, sumo deadlifts, and Romanian deadlifts. The question is, which is best? Maybe you've heard of these different deadlift techniques, or maybe you haven't, but if you have, maybe you have your own opinion, or maybe you've heard a lot of other people's opinions trying to ruthlessly convince you of which variation of the deadlifts is the best for a specific reason. But the truth is that they're all really fucking great. They're all really similar. But in today's video, we're gonna be breaking down the distinct key differences with myself and Bulky so you can have all the keys and education that you need to succeed. Now, first things first, I wanna let you know that this is not gonna be a detailed tutorial technique video showing you how to set up with the perfect technique of every single lift, but rather just a comparison of the differences between the lifts, the muscles they target, and what you can really use them for. But if you do wanna check out a detailed tutorial video on how to get your deadlift set up, you can check out this bad boy over here on this link, and I'll put it in the description below. And also, I want to remind you one more time that this is not me trying to say that any of these deadlift variations are better or worse than any other variation or any other variation that we don't even mention in this video. It's all about giving you the education so that you can explore these exercises, find out what you like best, and have the education to know when and how to use them within your own programs. And if you do have your own favorite variation, why don't you do me a favor and get down and comment right now what your favorite motherfucking variation is, and you might as well go and subscribe while you're there as well. Now, let's get into the video. Well, first things first, we're gonna come on in and take a little look at our conventional deadlifts. Now, we can't really do this without giving you at least a brief look at the tutorial and the technique of how we perform the setup. So, a conventional deadlift, we wanna be coming in close to the bar and with our shins basically touching, toes straight, and typically either at or just inside shoulder width. From here, we're gonna push our hips back as far as we can while maintaining a nice neutral spine, and then we're gonna bend the knees just a little bit to be able to grab that bar. From here, we pull our pits to pockets, get nice and tight, and the first thing we're gonna be doing, come back down for you, Bulky, is we're gonna actually be generating force by pushing into the ground with our legs, push, and then snap through, squeeze from the hips, and then lowering all the way back down, keep that bar nice and close before returning to the ground. Now, let's talk about the muscles that we're gonna be mostly recruiting with a conventional deadlift because of this particular setup. So, as you can see here, Bulky is getting a lot of tension and a lot of a big stretch back here on her glutes and her hamstrings. But because she's also folded fairly forward, we're also in this hinge position where her back and her erectors and the lower back are also going to be taking a lot of force too. And because she has this slight bend in the knees and she's pushing off the ground, she is going to be working a little bit of quads with this movement as well. So Bulky, let's give you 2 reps. Up, push, and all the way back and down. And we're getting a lot of strength driving off the ground and then controlling those reps back and down, making sure that we keep that bar nice and tight to our body to make sure we get them goddamn tasty reps. So, what is the purpose of doing our conventional deadlifts? Well, if you're the kind of person who wants to get fucking strong as all hell, who wants to be chasing performance-based goals and hitting PBs, and also build a hell of a lot of muscle along the way, then conventional deadlifts are fantastic. But I like to kind of categorize deadlifts from the ground, like our conventionals, like our sumos, as more of a strength-based movement that can definitely still build a lot of muscle. However, the reason why I think that they are better for strength and also great for hypertrophy is because of this reason. We come back into our position and we're gonna be getting all that tasty tension at the bottom, getting our body set up to be able to lift and move as much weight as possible. But when we're lifting heavy weight, a lot of the time there's not as much of a focus on our eccentric contraction when we lower the bar back down to the ground. And this is for a few reasons. One, a lot of the time people are just trying to lift as much weight as possible, and they don't really want to be wasting a lot of energy by eccentric controlling the weight. Obviously you should still control it to an extent, but it's not an eccentric focused lift. And also, when Bulky comes down and lowers the bar, so one more rep from Bulky, and then she's gonna come back to getting this tension, but then when we bend the knees, we kind of lose a little bit of that tension on the way down. Now, this might not make a lot of sense right now, but when I explain and explore our RDL variations, it will make a lot more sense. So, let's go on to our next variation. up on the list, we're going to be explaining and exploring our sumo deadlifts. Now, let's just quickly look at the setup, and as you can see now, there's a very distinct difference with Bulky's stance. Previously, she was stepping with her feet at shoulder width. Now, we've taken them outside of shoulder width and also turned the toes and knees out to the side like this. From here, the setup is very similar. We push the hips back, and we come down, keep that back nice and straight, but we're also going to be pulling ourselves up and into the bar, so we have a little bit more of a vertical torso and a little bit more leg drive off the ground. All right. I try to get Bulky to do a sumo wrestler entrance, and she's lame. But let's quickly go through. I'm going to be showing you a few distinctive differences between the conventional deadlift and the sumo the sumo deadlift, and why they are different, and more importantly, what muscles they work, and considerations that you might want to be able to consider for when you're selecting your options. So, Bulky, come into position. The first we're going to be talking about is our actual back and our positioning and what happens with that. So, with our conventional deadlifts, you saw the hips were really high and we were really bowed forward over the barbell. But with a sumo deadlift, we're a lot more upright with our torso. So, what that means is we're placing a lot less stress on the erectors and the lower back. We're definitely still working it, but not quite as much. Now, this is great because if you have a little bit of a tender lower back, or maybe your lower back's just playing up, or maybe you have super tight hamstrings and it's hard for you to get into that conventional stance, then this is going to be easing that pressure off so you can generate more leg drive off the ground, boom, and keep your back in a little bit more of a safer and stronger position to pull from. The next difference is going to be how much leg drive that we're generating, and whether that's coming from more of a hinge or more of a push off the ground. So, Bulky, come into position for me. Now, when we're in a sumo deadlift, not only is our back more upright, but we also have a lot more bend in the knees. What that does is it actually shortens the hamstrings, so we're definitely still working them, but not quite as much, and we distribute some of the tension into our quads, because it's kind of like now leg pressing the barbell off the ground. Bulky, come on upwards, push, and then hinging back and down like so. So yes, we're still working hamstrings with this, but we get a lot more quads because of that positioning and that leg drive off the ground. And another thing to consider with our sumo deadlift is also, coming back and down for you, Bulky, the additional stretch that we're going to be getting in on our adductors. Because we've come out in this wider stance, we get more stretch on the adductors, so they're going to be helping and contributing to the movement, whoosh, a lot more throughout the lift in comparison to our conventionals. And lastly, I'm the Glute Guru, so it'd be rude not to talk about the glutes comparing conventionals to sumos. So as you can see, we're going to be showing you our conventional setup again. With our feet together, we get this really big stretch back on the glutes and hamstrings in this nice tall position. Come on up, we 1 rep, Bulky, push, push, and back and down we go. Now this is fantastic because we get a lot of tension, we get a lot of stretch on those glutes. But when we come out wider into our sumo position, we take that wide stance and we externally rotate out with the glutes. Now what happens here is we're actually stretching those glutes out a little bit more, but it's actually creating a little bit less stretch on the glutes because our hips are down lower, because we're incorporating the quads, and just because of how the anatomy kind of works. Now Bulky, do 1 rep for me here, push, come through, and then back and all the way down. So we might feel a little bit less tension when we're down here on the stretch. But because we've also taken our glutes out into this externally rotated position, when we push up and we come up on the squeeze, our glutes are more shortened. So you might feel your glutes a lot more at the top, but when we're doing our deadlifts, what you feel at the top of the rep is far less important than what you feel at the bottom, because at the bottom, that's where we have all the tension. At the top, we're kind of just standing up and holding the barbell. Now, let me quickly tell you something. I've seen a lot of people posting saying that sumo deadlifts are not for glutes. Let me tell you a little something right now. Those people need to shut the fuck up, because yes, maybe you get a little bit more stretch on your hamstrings with and glutes with a conventional setup versus a sumo setup. But is that really something that we need to worry about? Are the glutes not working at all with sumo deadlifts? Definitely not. They're still playing a huge contributing role to the movement. So, for people out there who might be confused about any content that might have put out lately saying sumo deadlifts aren't for glutes, they definitely are for glutes. There's just very distinctive differences because of the setup that creates different tension in different muscles at different phases of the lift. So, you can pick whichever you decide and which you're most comfortable with. Don't let people go and get you all confused. Listen to the motherfucking education, baby. Yeah, well, one more technical little thing to mention for those of you who are seriously concerned about lifting as much weight as possible is the difference in the range of motion and how far the bar actually travels with our conventionals versus our sumos. With a conventional deadlift, coming back from your bulky, the bar starts in the same position and actually lifts all the way up. It's gonna come up to here. I'm gonna leave my hand here. Now bulky, come all the way down and now come into your sumo deadlift position and we'll see that when bulky comes up, the bar is actually a couple of inches shorter or lower than what it actually is with our conventionals. Now, this does mean less range of motion, so this does mean that you can actually potentially lift a lot more weight with this particular variation if you feel comfortable with this particular setup. It doesn't mean that, again, either or better or worse, but a conventional deadlift has a bit more range of motion, which is great for building muscle, and a sumo deadlift has a bit less range of motion, which is great for building strength. So, there you have it. So let's quickly just do a little recap about what we've learned so far about the differences between our conventionals and our sumos. We know that both of these movements are fantastic for building strength, typically in our lower rep ranges, anywhere between about 1 to 10 reps ideally, and they are also fantastic for building muscle, but they don't have as much of that eccentric focus, which is fantastic for building muscle. But the distinct differences between both of these lifts is that conventional deadlifts are going to be working a little bit less quads and a little bit more through our hamstrings, glutes, and our back. Now, our sumo deadlifts are going to be working a little bit more through our quads, a little bit less through our hamstrings, also less through our back, and also incorporating the adductors as well, and they are definitely still fantastic for your glutes. And last but not least, we're coming on in for our Romanian deadlifts, also known as our RDLs. Now, one thing to mention before we get started is that Romanian deadlifts typically are actually going to be starting not on the ground, but from a squat rack. One more thing to mention is they are very taxing on the grip, so if you have lifting straps, then it is a good option to use these if you want to get seriously more fucking jacked. Now, let's quickly go over the setup and just look at 1 or 2 reps before we explore and explain all of the epicness of RDLs. So, we come back into our position, make sure we have our back nice and tight like a tiger, with a very mild bend in the knees. We push our hips back as far as our hamstring flexibility allows, keeping that bar nice and tight to us, and then we pull all the way through and then squeeze. Give me one more rep, bulky, pushing those hips back, getting as much separation from those hips from the bar as we can, and then pull through and squeeze. Wow, beautiful work, bulky. And now, let's quickly take a look at the differences in the muscles worked and really the differences between the movements with our comparable lifts. Now, coming on up, bulky, now you'll notice that bulky is pretty much still in her conventional stance, and an RDL is very similar to our conventional deadlift in the sense that as we push back, we're going to be getting a lot of tension on those hamstrings, a lot of tension on those glutes, and a lot of tension all through our back as well. Coming on up for you, bulky, but because as bulky comes down, now we are starting the rep at the top and focusing on deliberately really controlling that eccentric the whole way down, and because the barbell doesn't actually touch the ground, we keep that tension the whole time throughout that entire eccentric, and we don't release that tension until we come all the way up to the top and actually squeeze the glutes again, which I also think that you should do. There's nothing wrong with squeezing the glutes when you deadlift. It's just going to be helping to lock out your hips and taking that tension off your lower back. These are fantastic because building that eccentric strength and that eccentric tension is fantastic for our hypertrophy. So you might not be able to have as much strength with this lift, but it's a bit more specific at keeping that targeted tension and getting that deep stretch on those glutes and hamstrings and keeping that targeted tension throughout the entire lift. Rack up, bulky. I know you're probably getting a little bit sick of doing all these goddamn deadlifts. So what does this mean? Well, our conventional deadlifts and our sumo deadlifts are definitely great for building muscle, but we are incorporating as much as we can to be able to make the movement as strong as we can, to incorporate other muscles to help assist with that movement, to be able to generate as much force as we possibly can to be able to lift as much weight as possible. With a RDL, we definitely still want to be getting stronger, we definitely still want to be lifting as much weight as possible, but we're deliberately taking those other factors out by not lowering the bar onto the ground and by deliberately controlling our eccentric down nice and slow before coming through, so we keep that tension really a lot more on the glutes and hamstrings rather than stopping, pausing, and using other muscle groups to be able to incorporate as much as we can to be able to create as much power and tension. So if you're more geared towards doing hypertrophy, then RDLs are a fantastic motherfucking option to include. Now, I'm going to make another video about this another time, but I quickly wanted to talk about a terminology that I like to use to be able to categorize different lifts. And we have our movement-based lifts, we have our movement/muscle-based lifts, and then we have our muscle-based lifts. And there is one more category, but we'll talk about that later in another video. Now, sumo deadlifts and conventional deadlifts are going to be falling definitely into that movement-based category. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're mostly going to be focusing on the cues, the technique, and doing everything that we can to be able to move as much weight as we possibly can with that movement. It's a little bit more geared towards building strength, hitting PBs, and also definitely building muscle, and probably better performed in lower rep ranges anywhere between about 1 to 10 reps. But with these lifts, even though you might definitely still feel the muscles working, it's probably not your main focus. You should be focusing more on mastering the movement and less on really feeling those muscles through the contractions. And the reason being is we incorporate a lot of muscle groups with these lifts, so sometimes it is a little bit harder to be able to actually feel the muscles working throughout it. The next category is our movement/muscle, and that's something that I think that an RDL falls into very, very, very well. And the reason being is it's still a movement that you want to get a lot stronger at. It's still a movement that you should be progressively overloading and trying to hit PBs on. It's still something you should be mastering and nailing your technique with, but we do a few different little things to be able to make sure that we can keep that targeted attention on a very specific group of muscles, or even an individual muscle, to make sure we can get them goddamn gains. And with these, yes, you are going to be focusing on the cues of the lifting, but you also want to be getting a little bit more of that internal mind-muscle connection to really focus on slowing down your reps, keeping that tension, feeling the stretch, feeling the squeeze, and getting them goddamn tasty contractions. And lastly, we also have things that are a little bit more geared towards our muscle focus. Now, we're talking about deadlifts, so I'm gonna be throwing in a banded back extension for an example here. Now, a banded back extension is something that really we can perform in high reps, something that the machine kind of gets us there, and yes, we need to have good technique, but we're really just trying to get that burn, that pump, and that squeeze in those muscles. And these are a little bit better suited towards doing them in higher reps, chasing that burn, chasing that pump, and we're not really gonna be trying to set PBs on a banded back extension. It might just be something that you'll be doing towards the end of your workout to kind of fatigue the muscle and get that little bit of that goddamn extra tasty pump in your ass. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, 3 epic badass motherfucking deadlift variations for you to be more educated about, so you can explore and explain how they work within yourself and program them better within your own routines. Now, which one should you do? Well, try them all. Some people will be more geared towards doing one particular deadlift because maybe that just suits their mechanics or their personal preference. And other people might prefer something else. Some people might like doing all 3. It doesn't really fucking matter. It just matters that you enjoy your fucking training, and it matters that I'm here to educate you along the way so you can make it even goddamn better. And if you like making your training better, well then why don't you do me a motherfucking favor? Because we're putting a goddamn lot more videos out here on the Glute Tube, coming out every motherfucking Tuesday, baby. So, Bulky, what do you reckon they should do?
Like?
I think they should like, comment, subscribe, turn on that notification motherfucking bell, and ladies and gentlemen, bulky. You know what they say. YouTube!